All right, hello and welcome to another Expert Inside interview. My name is John Golden from Sales Pop Online Sales Magazine and Pipeliner CRM, joining you as usual from a sunny San Diego. And today I'm delighted to be joined from all across on the other coast by Andres Lares, who is in Baltimore, Maryland. How are you doing, Andres?
Good, John. How are you doing?
Excellent. And you are managing partner, responsible day-to-day operations of the Shapiro Negotiation Institute, and you advise global leading organizations around negotiations, professional sports teams on player contracts and sponsorship negotiations, and develop SNI's patent pending performance improving technologies in the area of virtual reality, AI, and role play simulations. Fantastic. You've been featured in a bunch of Harvard Business Review, Forbes, CNBC, etc. But what we want to talk about today is the core part, is this negotiating and influencing. So first of all, Andres, tell to me a little bit about what's the difference actually between negotiating and influencing.
Yeah, so negotiation, both sides have something that the other party wants, right? So
Mhm.
essentially that's really at the heart of it. And so whether it's changing a service or a product for dollars or bartering, product for a product, those are all in the negotiation. For influencing and really kind of persuasion, you can put them in similar terms,
Mhm.
is that you're compelling the other side to do something. And so
Right.
in that case, a little bit different that, you may not have anything that I want, but I've got something that you want. It's one direction. You're compelling that person to do something, to take behaviors you're looking for, something like that. And so, a lot of similar skills, obviously, for the two, but there are some differences.
Yeah, and just focusing on influencing for a moment, because if you take a sales process, right, as you said, influence, you're trying to get somebody to do something. A mistake a lot of salespeople make, especially earlier in their career, is when they engage. Say I go meet with you, or I have a Zoom call with you as a prospect, and you we have a great call, and you and we say, oh, this is great. Let's schedule a follow up and all of that, and I go away thinking that's fantastic. I got Andreas's, follow up meeting. But the reality is, between now and the follow up meeting, you're doing nothing, right? So I haven't really asked you. I haven't asked you. I haven't influenced you. I've done nothing. I literally have just scheduled another meeting.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple of things there, right? So I think people are scared, on the sales side, people are scared to give homework, if you will,
Yeah.
to the client because you're creating friction potentially.
Hmm.
And so I think it doesn't necessarily have to be just kind of giving the other side homework, but whether it's something to think about or maybe you're communicating in between. One of the things we talked about in our influencing model is you want to create opportunities to show reliability because that'll help trust, right? Develop
Hmm.
trust. So an example of that is, if I'm setting up the call, of course, if it's the next day, then you don't have to do anything. But if it's a week later, 2 weeks later, then do you want to say, hey, John, I know we've got a scheduled call, on the 15th. Before then, I'm going to send you, an article that I think may make sense for you to read, and then two or three questions I want you to think about in advance. And so whether they have or have not, it gives you a chance to then 2 or 3 days later follow up. And so a couple things are happening. Number one, you've shown that you're dependable, right? It's shocking,
Hmm.
but most people don't do the simplest thing, which is they don't do what they say they're going to do.
Yep.
But the second is that then you've sent them something that even if they don't fully think about it, just their email ping in their inbox, hey, we got a meeting next week. Just wanted to send you what we talked about. Here's the article. Here are the questions. You're getting a little bit of thought process there. And so, it's trying to kind of get those wins around the edges where you can.
Yeah, and doing it as you said. I mean, right now, doing it in a kind of an elegant way, if you like, rather than just because there's nothing worse, isn't there, than those follow up emails that are meaningless, right? And that's kind of irritating to people. It's
Yeah.
it,
I don't know what to say, but I've been told that I should follow up by
yeah,
my boss, and so
exactly.
that's what that screams. Yeah, my Salesforce or any other pipeline or any CRM system I have is tracking my activity, so I just got to make sure I submit, at least a couple other emails.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, so those non-valuable communications. But let's talk a little bit too about negotiation, because, and I'm pretty sure I know what you're going to say on this, but a lot of people obviously make the mistake of thinking negotiation is something that happens at the end of a sales process. Why is that incorrect?
Yeah, so you obviously are leading me, and I think we're on the same page. And so that's one of the biggest mistakes we see is I can't tell you how many clients come to us sales organizations that want us to do negotiation training for that
Mhm.
exact reason, which is okay. I'm selling, I'm selling, I'm selling. Because I just want a sale, whatever it is, as much as possible, and then I'll worry about the pricing later, and I'll worry about the negotiation
Mhm.
later. and all of a sudden now you've got to negotiate an MSA. You got to negotiate the price, the terms, the conditions, the warranty, the whatever it may be. And then it starts to either fall apart, or at that point you're caving because you just want the deal done. And
Mm.
so one of the things we talk about is the negotiation starts right from the get go. It's how much value you deliver, and both parties are getting a feel for each other, right?
Yeah.
If I'm selling you something, John will have a sense of whether I'm desperate and really want to get this sale because it's the end of a quarter and I
Yeah.
really need it, or because I'm discounting a lot already before we even get it. So people have that sense, right, intuitively, and so you really want to be negotiating at the beginning. That means deep discovery, understanding that also helps your sales process, right? If you do a
Mhm.
deep discovery to prepare for your negotiation, that should help you to present a better product in a way that's more compelling to the other side. So it is absolutely one of the most common mistakes that we see.
Yeah, and if you leave the negotiation obviously to the end of the process, I mean, that's when where are you going with that? That's when you're ending up, discounting and trying to incent and all these things because you didn't do all those other steps in advance. There's really nowhere for you to go when you start
Exactly.
negotiating at the end.
For sure. And so it's then it becomes a bit of a fixed sum, right? It's
Mhm.
and so that's the earlier you are and the more things you're putting on the table to negotiate, the better. And then the second piece is then that really begs trading for value, right? So number
Mhm.
one is you don't want to leave negotiating till the end. And number two is you don't want to just discount, right? You want to be trading for value all the time. And it's hard to do that because you're running out of time. Right? If you left it for the end, you're close and you're almost getting it done, rather if you're doing it all the way through. And so the best practice we'll see is, hey, here's our MSA. While you're looking through things, here's our MSA. You can take a look at it, send it to your legal team so
Mhm.
we have that happening at the same time. And if anything, that demonstrates that you've done it before, right? If
Yeah.
you're a client, I think that's saying, hey, Andres has done this before. I can kind of trust him to lead me through this process and get to a result that's going to be successful because you kind of manage the entire situation rather than letting the client kind of go wherever they want to go, and they haven't been through the sales process like you have.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point because basically you're in many ways you're making it easy for them, right? You're making it easy for them to move through this rather than because let's face it, as buyers, especially if you're in a large corporation, if you're selling B2B, right, your prospect is in a large corporation, getting everything at the end, number one, you go to legal. Great. Legal now says, sorry, we have all this other stuff. I can't get to it right now. You go to the CFO to sign up. Well, why didn't you bring me this before? All of those things. So it can be a very frustrating thing for the buyer
For
uh,
sure.
to when everything just lands at the end.
And they fall apart there. So I think it's one of the reasons that if instead, of course, not too early, right? It becomes
Sure.
assumptive where you're doing a discovery call. And John, let me walk you through what this process is going to look like. And you're like, okay, hold on a
Yeah.
second. I'm
Yeah.
not giving you my blood type yet. But
Yeah.
I think if you kind of walk through, okay, once there's some, okay, here's the 4 or 5 pieces where it's better to have this concurrently happening. If procurement needs to be involved, let's start talking to them. And then you can kind of have an internal champion talking to procurement rather than you being left at the end dealing with procurement. Then okay, let's get this to legal so they can start reviewing in the meantime. Let's talk to your technology team to make sure that X, Y, and Z can be done. And so what happens is if you do that, I think there's this confidence that you convey, not just about what you're offering, but also that you've seen it before. And so I think that is a very successful way to do it. But of course, that takes time to prepare, and that also
Mhm.
requires a level of confidence and a subject matter expertise, right? If you just taking control when you don't know what you're talking about is not very effective. So you do have to have that experience and understand the steps and kind of walk through all that.
Yeah, because the last thing you want is, and I one stage I took over an organization, and then the first thing I did was, yeah, I went, who's our best customers? I'm going to go see them, right? So I went off to see them, and customers loved what we did, but their biggest complaint, it was like, you're really hard to do business with. In other words, we want to buy from you, but your process is really hard. And I went back and I realized that we had made this all of that the company had made all of the process and everything to suit themselves internally, completely excluding the prospect or customer from the equation. So you're actually making it, creating friction for people who actually wanted to buy from you.
I love that because one of the things we spend time talking about is if you look at our negotiating process and we're talking about sales processes,
Mhm.
a sales process, in a way, of course, it is important to have a process and you
Sure.
need one. But the process, even just the mentality where it's a sales process rather than it being around the buyer's process and
Mhm.
the buyer's journey is really crazy, right? And that's what happens is we get too bogged down. It's where we started this meeting. It's if you think about, okay, well, I'm going to send this email because my sales process says that I need at least 10 touches to make it likely to close. Well, that's
Yeah.
felt by the party. It's a meaningless, there's no value in that email. But if
Hmm.
you're instead thinking about, okay, once a week, I'm going to think about John as a client. And I think, okay, at this point in time, based on what we've talked about, what could help make John's life easier? You know what? When I send the MSA so we can look at it, when I send this article, when I send this case study of a similar client, just so that and so I
Yeah.
think that is a completely different way to think about it. Now, of course, you can still go through
Mhm.
prospecting, discover, as you go along, but it is that emotional intelligence. It's about the customer, and I
Yeah.
think it's interesting that you found that, but that is also another common trend we find is it's all about us and really should be all about them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It is amazing, and then negotiate. Even the term negotiation. There's a lot of people who are really, who love sales and really good at it and stuff, but they fear that piece at the end. They, again, look, they think it's at the end, but they fear that whole idea of negotiation, and they sometimes you even see them kind of turn into a different person, like the confident person is gone, or the engaging person is gone, and now they're suddenly in a
Yep.
defensive mode because a negotiation, it may be like their frame of reference is negotiation is combat.
I think there's so much there. I mean, number one, I think people are philosophically thinking of negotiation as I'm negotiating against John rather than with
Mm.
John.
Yeah,
And if you really think about it, in the best negotiation, now, of course, this does not mean in every, right? There's
sure.
some negotiations where the other party is out for blood and entirely transactional. And so then you
Mhm,
must change, and there's
mhm,
models for that. But 99% of business to business negotiations are, I mean, that's an extension of a relationship that's large and multiple parties and stakeholders and priorities. And so that is one where you want to be looking for those mutual wins. That's why the win-win cliche is so important, is that you
mhm,
want to be thinking about that. And so it starts with thinking about with rather than against. And then what we find is there's really two main reasons. I mean, there's lots, but there's two main reasons why people are kind of, they're anxious about negotiation. And they feel like it's that balance. They feel like if they push too hard, they're going to damage the relationship.
yeah.
But if they don't push enough, they're getting taken advantage of, right? They're leaving money on the table. And so I think really any good negotiating training is about being able to understand that you can push hard, you can be aggressive, but you can do it the right way. So, right, so
Mhm,
it does not mean that you need to leave money on the table or not be prioritizing your objectives, but how you do it. And I think any of us can think about that where there's really nice ways to do things. If you spend time really kind of discovering what this side cares about and asking lots of questions, that, for example, is investing your time into the relationship. People appreciate that
yeah.
rather than just coming in the table, banging their hands and saying, this is the max we can do, take it or leave it. Right. And so, of course, you're not going to, I mean, you might get to that result eventually, but it's a heck of a lot different if you haven't put in the time. You haven't shown that you cared. You haven't,
Mhm.
really found out what the other side is really needs, is motivated by. So I think those are kind of the things that we see most often.
Yeah, and I think that's the fundamental piece, isn't it? That you go in with that win-win attitude, that you go, there's two, and to be honest, in any, you know better than I do, in any negotiation, both sides end up having to give something, and it's so, and I think when people walk away saying, yeah, I had to give up a little bit, they gave up a little bit, but this all seems fair. I think if you have that attitude, it can actually be an enjoyable process, and I think that's the other thing is why does it have to be perceived as something, not, I wouldn't say negative, but something that's like not enjoyable, say a not enjoyable part of the process.
For sure. And I think the other piece of that is also preparation. So that
Hmm.
one of the reasons it's not enjoyable is, right, if you push too hard, you might ruin the relationship, you don't push enough, but then it's, do you come in prepared? And preparation is not only so that you perform better, but preparation is also so you increase your confidence, and that
Yeah.
also allows you to perform better. One of the things that I like the most, an example that most people can relate to, isn't necessarily a negotiation, if you will, but you start to think about kind of that win-win concept. So a good example I always find is in sports, you see it with ticket sales. So you look at the teams, if you're selling tickets for $20 and they're not selling very much, right?
Hmm.
Let's say for a baseball team. Well, most people then, okay, well, take it down to dynamic pricing, 18, 16, 14, 10, 8. And so
Hmm.
you're now selling them for $8. And what you've done is devalued them. It's going to take a long time. You're selling them for 8. 2 or 3 years from now, you're good again. It's going to be very difficult for you to raise the price from 8 to
Yeah.
20 again,
Yeah.
right? And so what happens instead is, hey, we're going to leave the price at 20, but we're going to give away a free baseball cap with it.
Hmm.
And that baseball cap costs you $3 or $4 to produce, but it's valued at $15, $20 to the customer.
Yeah.
So what happens is you're still spending 20, now you're getting a cap rather than $8 and you're just getting the ticket. And so the margin's 17 rather than the margin's, 8. And so I think those are examples of that's like that win-win, growing the pie mentality, where rather than just discounting and you're eroding value for everybody, you're adding value, right? If you're buying 25,000 hats, you're getting them at a much cheaper than the one person's
Hmm.
going to buy them individually, and you can do some unique things. And so that's kind of that okay, let's put ourselves in their shoes. Let's think about what they want. Let's try to defend against just discounting, even though it's easy. And let's try to add value here so everyone's better off.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really profound point there for people, because it is something that often people overlook. And the fact is, when you lower prices, when you discount and you lower prices, it's really hard, if not impossible, to put them back up again. As you said, because now you've just trained, but you've also communicated that, to be honest, the ticket wasn't worth $20. It's actually worth eight.
Exactly, right, and so and people sense that, and so
Mhm.
now, of course, it's not the pricing dynamic, and
Yeah, of
there's
course.
some ways around it, but I think if you're thinking about adding value and keeping the price, I mean, we do this. There's professional service companies of the big four we work
Mhm.
with, and same thing. It's the same concept with them, right? Do you want to discount your, so the way they price it in professional services is partner hours and director hours,
Yeah.
manager hours, associate hours, put it all together, and here's your scope. But instead, okay, well, what if we instead added another team from risk, and they actually did, a full analysis of, and suggestions on risk mitigation for whatever it may be. Well, that's an example. You can leave the price the same, add more value, and now you've actually opened up an opportunity for a risk team to start doing more work with your company. Again, everyone's better off. And so, but again, there's a reason that this isn't done, right? This requires more prep. This requires the
Mhm.
baseball team figuring out and purchasing baseball hats, requires the professional services firm to really think about, do understand the business so well and ask questions so well that they will position something that is of value to the client or potential client. So that is one of the reasons it doesn't happen, right? It takes more work, but it's certainly worth it.
No, absolutely. And then what do you how do you advise people, say if the negotiation is starting to go south, right? Things aren't it's not going well, the relationship is starting to deteriorate, all of that. How is the best way of mitigate, or rescuing yourself from that?
And really, there's kind of three things we talk about. One is bringing someone else. So
Mm,
on either party, right? And so just, if John and I are disconnected and we just can't really align, it's okay. Well, then why doesn't Jeff and this partner negotiate on behalf of him today? So not on behalf, but kind of take his place
mhm,
and lead the way. And so that can be very effective. The second is just taking some time. And so it's, taking some time will, time heals, not everything, but it does help. And so just taking a little bit of time. Hey, why don't we kind of circle back in a week or two? And so a lot has changed, right? If you think about how much happens in your life in a week or two, you forget about something entirely, and family and friends and travel
mhm.
and work and all this stuff happens. And so you come back maybe with a fresh perspective. And the third, and it could be any of these combinations, is also changing the environment. And so I say this all the time. Think about, okay, if I meet you and you come to my office and it's very formal, we sit down, we have a conversation. Now let's say you and I meet at a Starbucks,
Yeah.
right, for coffee. And there's just a very different conversation that's had. There's just it's just very different. So you can decide, it's not that one is better or worse, but you can
Mhm,
decide if you want the formal. Or for example, think how different it is when I go to your office and say, hey John, I'll come meet you at your office to talk about it. When we get to a point where I don't like where things are going, I can just get up and very seamlessly I can say, you know what, John, let's take a break, or I've got to take another call, whatever it may be. I step out of your office. It's a lot harder to do that if you come to my office. All right, John, like get out. And
yeah.
so it's just that unfortunately isn't quite as smooth. And so those kinds of things, changing the environment a little bit, more formal, less formal, which location, your turf on purpose, so you're more comfortable. Those are things, and not that to be overly done, but
Sure.
when you do all of these things together, you take some time, you bring in another negotiator, or even if you're adding it to you, you're changing the environment, those start to really add up together.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've obviously been doing this for a while and have deep expertise in this area. Have you seen any significant changes over the last number of years in just how people approach this? Or is there anything changing in negotiations? Or if you follow a process like yours, is it pretty much the same?
So the skills are very similar.
Hmm.
So we teach a model called the three P's: prepare, probe, propose. And
Hmm.
not that all of negotiation can go down to three
Sure.
phrases, but preparation is the only aspect of a negotiation over which you have control. That hasn't changed. Being efficient and effective. You have a lot more tools now. You have a lot
Hmm.
more data now, but that hasn't changed. Probing and discovering and listening, that hasn't changed either. That is the most critical skill of a negotiator. And then proposing is about really understanding what the other side cares about. And so offering solutions that will satisfy the other side and be optimal for you.
Right.
So those hasn't changed. But if you think about how much access to information we have, that has changed. I think another big one is just communication where it happens. So we do a lot more on video calls now than ever. We do a lot more on, call, text, all those things. And so what happens is those have less richness. So we talk about something called the media richness theory in our training, in
Yeah.
that sense that, this is pretty good. You and I spending time together, at least on video,
Yep.
there's just a different conversation that's had if we just did over the phone.
Sure.
But that's even more so if it was on, in person. Now, for me to fly over to California, it makes it a little harder. So it is great to have that video capacity. But you think with the richest medium being in person, right? Because the time you spend before and after, and you grab lunch, and there's all this time for bonding and rapport building. And you go all the way to if you're texting back and forth or emailing back and forth where you can't even tell tone. And so I think we've seen people go to the easiest. The new generation tends to want text,
Yep.
email, social media conversations that are much less rich. So those are the things that are changing, and you need to be thoughtful about it.
Yeah, no, those are great points. And if you think about it, say, younger people in coming into the workforce, and maybe they prefer text and all that. But but a lot of the times, and one of the things they're going to realize is a lot of the times they're going to be dealing with decision makers who are, of my generation or whatever. I happen to like technology, but a lot of people are going, so they're going to have to adapt to who they're actually negotiating with.
I love that. So in influencing in the program that we do, we will bring in one of the personality assessments. DISC is usually the easiest, but
Hmm.
the Big Five is a little
Yeah.
bit more kind of evidence to support it. But and so the reason we cover it, we talk about it, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah," so we're aware of our own personalities, and that's a little bit of it. But it's actually more so you think about the other parties, and less as a personality, but more as a communication style.
Yeah.
And the idea is not only are you, when you're negotiating, not only are you kind of from a content perspective, what you do and say, but how you say it, right? Think about it. There's people who clearly would prefer to be sent a 2-page brief in advance to be well prepared, and then you can have a real conversation with them.
Yeah.
There's some people that if you send them a 2-page brief in advance, they will gloss over it. They'll be upset you expected them to read it in advance and feel like their time is too valuable for that. And so that's the same goes with which communication choice you choose. But I would say it absolutely should be intentional, right? So there was a study that I read a few weeks ago, and it has shocked me, is that more than 50% of, and I can't remember how old they were, I want to say like 10 to 16, somewhere around that age, are uncomfortable making a phone call. So if you were to ask them, hey, I need you to call this number, it was like something like call this number, a dry cleaner to find out if your shirt's ready, and they were uncomfortable making that phone call. They would prefer to send a text, and they would not do it at all. They would just literally leave the shirt there or whatever it was rather than make the phone call. And again, the example is not perfect, but that
Yeah.
concept, more, I do remember for sure, more than 50% would be willing to forego whatever value they had from that service if they couldn't, if they couldn't message them in some way, they would just refuse to make a phone call. And that means you're not intentional. That means you're allowing yourself to be boxed. And I think
Mhm.
that's where the real problem is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Especially if you're going to be dealing with people who just like, no, I'm sorry, I've talk on the phone. That's what I've done all my career. If you're not going to call me, then that's a
Not
problem.
going to work. Yeah.
Not going to work. Yeah. So listen, this has been Andres. This has been fantastic. So much information packed in here. Clearly, Shapiro Negotiation Institute have so much value to bring. All of Andres' information will be below this video. But before we go, please do remind people about what you do.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. And it's been a pleasure. So, I mean, Shapiro Negotiation Institute is a negotiation influence training consulting company. We work with companies of all sizes and industries, but it's really a focus on negotiation and influencing. And certainly one of the most common functions we train is sales. We're global, so we train in 7 languages. Most of our work is global. So that's exciting. And we've been around for about 30 years. And so I think, really if there's some challenges around negotiation, influencing, or selling, hopefully then folks will kind of reach out, and ShapiroNegotiations.com is our website, or our LinkedIn, best place to reach out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would encourage people. Hey, go check out. Look at your own pipeline. Look at your own performance, and start seeing are you losing a lot of stuff at the end of the process, and is it because you start your negotiations too long or too late? So I would encourage you to go check it out. As I said, all the information will be below here. So thank
And
you again.
I think we're going to recap it all. And don't send an email, or pick up the phone when you can, or go there in person if you can. If you want to summarize it, I think it's a very big takeaway. You brought that up earlier, and I think it's it's too much to forget about that.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Always communicate with people how they like to be communicated with. It's always a good rule.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, thanks again. Thank you for watching and listening. And I'll see you all again really soon. Thank you.